Welcome to LEAFline, episode number 22.
Welcome, everyone. Episode 22, yes. Hi, Ben.
I'm impressed that we've done 22 episodes, and also it's extremely depressing to think about we've been in lockdown 22 plus weeks.
Yep. It's just the way it goes. It's like...
So we begin this episode with a sigh as I sit across from Brian Ralston, associate to the pastor of Centenary Church.
And he's Ben Aquina. He is director of all things modern worship and technology and nerd ministries here at Centenary.
Not directing so much modern worship lately.
Well, not so much, but coordinating, I don't know, facilitating, something. So we're glad you're with us. Thank you for joining us. We're here to talk through some good stuff. We have some fun topics coming up for you, so stay tuned.
And we love hearing from you, so email us, centenary1911@gmail.com, or leave a comment in the description below, and enjoy your updates.
Can I get an update?
So with the updates, we do have something new starting. We have Vine groups. Those are online Zoom-based small groups. We want you to join in, and this is an opportunity to end some of the isolation that a lot of us are struggling with. I know I'm struggling with it somewhat. The idea that we're not really getting to connect with folks in our church family or even in our world very much right now. So while it's not what we would want, in-person meetings is what we would want. Zoom is the next best thing. These will be weekly gatherings over Zoom. We're going to be doing a Bible study through the book of James, but the topic isn't as important as the connection. So we're not wanting you to focus on the curriculum. We're asking you to focus on the connection. So if you'd like to join a Vine group, if you've not joined yet, please sign up. You can email that email address that you know so well. You can also look at your Leaf Brief and connect through that, or email me directly, and I'll help you out. We've got 4 of them starting this week, a couple more next week, so join in.
And if you watched the church live stream this past Sunday and stuck around for the hymn postlude, you might have noticed somebody other than Ben and Brian singing hymns for you, and that is an exciting development for us. Brian called in some favors, got some help from some of his friends in Escalon, and one of our podcast listeners, Marty Mininger, also chimed in, and he was able to help with editing video and adding lyrics to it. And so it's really cool that now we've got our actual traditional worship staff contributing to the hymn postludes on Sunday. I'm really glad to see it. I'm really grateful for the help and truly grateful for the variety. So that's an exciting new development. And if you've got observations on that, centenary1911@gmail.com. Anything else, Brian?
I'm good.
Recommendations?
Give it a try.
Recommendations, give it a try.
So Ben's going to talk first.
Okay. What you're reading, what you're watching. Ben, I've been reading through the Pride and Prejudice book by Jane Austen lately, and even though I haven't quite finished the book, my wife and I decided a few nights ago to restart watching the A&E miniseries. I think it's a 6-episode miniseries, and it's oh so gosh darn good, and we've been enjoying that a lot. If you're into that sort of thing, go for it. If you're the beer and pizza and sports things kind of crowd, then forget that I mentioned it and don't make fun of me, please. But we've been enjoying that a lot. We've actually been enjoying that more than our rewatch of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because we finished Iron Man 3 and are in the middle of Thor Dark World, and my review of that movie is...
That was a complicated review.
Yes.
0 stars.
It was layered.
Yeah. Very nice.
Brian, what you reading, what you watching, listening to?
You know, I just am still struggling to focus on anything. I don't know what my dealio is. But yeah, so I'm just listening to a number of books, a number of podcasts, but nothing that exciting. I'm going back and rereading.
Historical biographies.
Surprise,
Okay.
surprise. And some detective stories.
Some show tunes.
Surprise, mysteries, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I'm boring right now. Nothing really exciting, even to recommend. I'm just kind of slogging through. Now, it's been really fun because during the weird smoke we've been having and the weird weather, it's forced Kathy and I to be inside more, which is fine for Kathy, but Brian struggles with that. But as a result, we have actually read more, listened more, and we're talking more about what we're reading, listening. So that's been kind of fun for us. Nothing new, but it's just kind of fun more to interact with what we're reading, listening. And I'm trying desperately not to pay attention to current events. So I caught myself recently. It was so there's a podcast named Armstrong Getty. They're a talk show sort of deal. And I didn't want to listen to current podcasts. So I went back 3 years and I was listening to podcasts from 2017. And I found it rather enjoyable just to hear the news and the current events of 2017. For some reason, it really helped me for like a few episodes just to be 3 years in the past and not current day. So,
I can absolutely appreciate that. Holy cow. That sounds delightful.
yeah, it was kind of fun. And I had not listened to them. I just started listening to the show in the last couple of years. Kathy and several of our friends were really into that show. I never listened to the radio show. I've only listened to them as a podcast. But so I went back to the archives and just started listening at some random date in 2017, and it was a lot of fun. So in my brain right now, it's July of 2017 in some ways, and I kind of miss it. So
Is that your give it a try?
sure, Armstrong
Okay.
Getty is on the conservative end of things, but they're not normal crazy talk radio. They're more enjoyable. So if you've never heard of them, give it a try. It's not Christian, but it is good values, men who are of good values, and yeah. So it's on the conservative end of things, just as a warning, but not crazy. So.
Brian, why don't you send me a YouTube link and I'll put it in the description of this podcast.
Sure.
Okay, so you'll be able to look that up there. For my give it a try this week, I went down a weird YouTube rabbit hole recently, and I found some channels such as History of Middle-earth and Lore of Middle-earth. These are YouTube channels. So what I've always loved about J.R.R. Tolkien's work is not just the stories and the beautiful way he tells them, but really the richness added to his stories by the layers of history and culture that Tolkien built into his created world. And these channels provide video essays about those various things. And Brian is smirking at me across the room.
Yes, I am. Talk about nerd ministries. It's a wonderful, wonderful world, though.
One of the videos I really liked was the origins and identities of the 5 wizards of Middle-earth. I always knew about Saruman and Gandalf and Radagast the Brown, and I always wondered how many more wizards in Middle-earth there were and what their origins were, and I'm not curious anymore because now I know. I saw a video about why the One Ring makes you invisible and why certain beings were less vulnerable to it changing their personalities. I saw another video that had a tactical analysis of the Siege of Minas Tirith, and they built these essays by distilling and cross-referencing information from the Lord of the Rings appendices, which I have read, the Silmarillion, which I tried and failed to read, and Tolkien's unfinished tales. I mentioned this to my wife because she's way more into Tolkien than I am, and I thought she might find them interesting. Her response was, why not just reread the book and learn this stuff that way?
Yeah, that's not nearly as much fun, though.
She rereads The Lord of the Rings multiple times each year. They are her comfort food. But for people like me who do not have a master's degree in literature, who have some trouble cutting through the very high mythological tone of the Silmarillion and some of those other things. So if you're not as smart as my wife, but love a deep cut into Middle-earth, I recommend those things, and I'll put some links in the description below.
So weirdly, that's one of the things I'm looking forward to about Heaven is to get to hang out with J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. They were good friends in real life.
Impromptu trivia. What does JRR stand for?
J.R.R. That's what it stands for.
That's correct. John Ronald Rule.
So, very nice, Ben. Very nice.
Thanks. On to trivia.
Trivia.
So we had 2 trivia questions last week. The first one, the category was local legend. Question: before he was blowing up planets and excavating the Ark of the Covenant, George Lucas made a much more personal film that was inspired by his experiences growing up in Modesto. Brian, what was that movie called?
Happy Days.
That's correct.
Wait, American Graffiti. I
That's
like
a good one.
spontaneously getting Ben to laugh. So, American Graffiti.
American Graffiti. And I think anybody that lives locally and did not get that answer correctly is kicking themselves now. Like, oh, of course. Because we have to...
Graffiti weekend in June, blah, blah, blah.
Yes,
yeah.
Bad traffic weekend.
Part of Heritage in Modesto.
Well, you know who did get it correctly is I got an email from Bob Uziak, which usually means Joyce knew the answer, but it might have been him this time. So congratulations to both of you. You get so many of them anyway. And young master Jeff Jacobs also got that one correct. Brian, have you seen that movie?
Oh, yeah.
I love that movie, man. It's so
moons
good.
ago.
Richard Dreyfuss. It's
Yeah.
all of them. Yeah,
It's
wonderful.
It's kind of a weird classic in a way, and it was his first movie, right?
I think that was actually after THX 1138.
Okay, so his second movie.
THX 1138 is very interesting.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
thankfully never seen that one. Talk about nerd ministry. Okay.
Nerd Ministry indeed.
Second trivia question.
Okay, so I don't remember what I called the category for this one. Something about ancient warfare. So, question: a formation of interlocked shields with spears protruding was a hallmark of trained soldiers in ancient Greece. What is the Greek name for this military formation from which we get our modern scientific word for toe bones, phalanges? Jeff Jacobs knew the answer.
Of course he did.
He did. It was phalanx.
Phalanx.
Which is, yeah. So, Jeff, kudos to you, man.
Way to go.
Okay, so new category this week, rock legends. Question. Everyone knows the 4 Beatles are, Brian?
Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and some other dude, George Harrison.
Yeah, thank you for turning that into a song. But Ringo Starr was not the group's first drummer. What curly-haired Brit was the group's drummer from 1960 to 1962 before being kicked to the curb to make room for Ringo? And you can send your answer to centenary1911@gmail.com.
The 5th Beatle.
Oh, shoot. Also, if you want to send us a trivia answer, be aware, please, we record on Tuesdays. So if you want to answer trivia, please do so by Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Otherwise, I will not mention your name on the show, and I'll feel really guilty about that.
Story time, 'cause the lockdown is boring.
I have tried telling the weekly story a few times in the past, and they've been so disastrous that we end up not using them on the show.
Wait, story time with Brian is being hijacked?
Yes,
Wow.
Ralston Reflections will not
Ralston
take place
Reflections
today.
will not take place? Okay, great. I'm looking forward to this. Ben's story. Yay!
So my wife was homeschooled when she was growing up. It was a great fit for her personality, but she decided very early into our marriage she did not want to homeschool her own kids for various reasons. Among others, she didn't want to do the homeschooling herself. But COVID hits, and in the early months of 2020, we start hearing horror stories about how distance learning is just going really, really poorly. And as many of our listeners know, my boy started kindergarten 2.5 weeks ago. And even before that, Kristen is wondering, do I have to start, so we were already researching homeschool curriculum just in case distance kindergarten for some reason didn't work out. So my son is now homeschooling. And she did her research very well, and she was very specific to find a homeschool curriculum that was Christian. And so in addition to learning his ABCs, learning basic math skills, my boy has been learning about God. He's been learning, and actually in his first week of homeschool, he did a bit of curriculum that was about the creation. And so every day he would color in a picture or draw a picture with flowers and things, whatever was created on that day. Well, on day 7, the Lord rested. So my wife was trying to explain to him, he had difficulty with this. Like, why can't I draw anything? Like, why don't I have anything to color? Well, nothing was created on that day. God rested on that day. So we leave that paper blank. He goes, number 7 is blank. And he sort of lit up and he goes, oh, just like Brian is blank.
That's awesome.
She had to explain, no,
I'm
sweetie,
blank.
Brian is blind.
I'm blank, though. I like that. I'd like to be blank. Right now, I'd like to be blank. That'd be really good.
It sounds like you're
That's awesome.
Censoring yourself from cursing.
I'm
Yes. Okay.
I'm blank. That's nice. I like that. I like the fact that Isaiah considers me even when he's schooling, because I'm just ever present in his mind.
You're a celebrity in our house. He loves you.
Celebrity. Well, I did make the top 4 list of his favorite places on Earth.
That's true. That's
behind
true.
Disneyland, Six Flags, and my sister and I both made the list. Her house, Cindy's house, and Brian's house.
Yeah.
Of course, because I have a pool. That's the only reason. So.
No, he just likes you, period.
Yeah.
He's way less threatened by you than by other adults, which is weird because you don't make a lot of effort to ingratiate yourself to young people. You like being the scary old guy.
Now I do. Yeah, I used to be Uncle Bad Dog, and that's actually the reference that my sister made.
Uncle Bad Dog.
Ben, at one point, dropped Isaiah off at our house for a swim. Is it okay to tell that?
Yeah.
Cindy hosted Isaiah Akina for a swim at my house, and I went out and played with him in the pool for a little while. And at one point, Cindy was sitting on the side, gasping for breath because she's old and she needs a break when caring for children. But she goes, oh, it's good to see Uncle Bad Dog is still around. And that's a reference from when I used to play with Peter and Carly in a very active way when they were little children. Carly would have been about 1 and Peter was 4. And I used to just pretend to be a dog and jump around the floor, barking and growling and attacking them and tickling and all that. And they would refer to me as Bad Dog. And so, yeah, I used to be way engaged with children. And as I've gotten older, I've realized I'm getting old and I don't have it in me to play with those children anymore. Let that be somebody else's job. So, yes, I've become an old cranky man.
specifically an old cranky Jewish man. I think.
Curmudgeon, yes. I, for some reason, go to my Jewish man voice. I don't know why. It's just the way I am.
It's fun.
Main topic.
Okay, so we're moving on. What are we on to? Holy cow, it's main topic.
Main topic time. I got to stop talking like this now.
No, you can keep going.
So, main topic today, Ben is going to introduce us with the idea of road rage. No, that's not our main topic, but we're talking about road rage.
I heard a really interesting discussion about road rage a few months ago. I don't remember whether it was a podcast or a radio show, but it's an interesting thing about why are we so edgy when we're behind the wheel on a freeway? What is it specifically about that? Because, it's something... We've grown up in cars. There's no reason why we should be particularly nervous behind the wheel. But they explained it to me that on some visceral level, the human body knows that it's moving faster than it's meant to. And there's something about this. It puts you in a heightened state of awareness. And so that even if somebody just inconveniences you by trying to move into your lane before you're out of it, they didn't notice you there. There's this weird little impulse, this awareness that this person just threatened my life. And so road rage has become such a problem over the years. And Brian, you talked about this earlier with, would you please mention about how instead of driving used to be a recreational thing, even though automobiles have been around for so long.
So I'm old enough to remember when driving was recreational and enjoyable, and people would go for Sunday drives.
Do you want to go to the movies or do you want to go for a drive?
Yeah, and it would be, and even going on vacation, part of the vacation would be the drive. And it was just enjoyable because life just moved at a slower pace and traffic was different, and those who commuted had usually not terrible commutes.
And jobs and careers were built where driving was not a necessity.
Yeah.
You took a job in your hometown.
Right. And so driving, even when I was a kid, was still an enjoyable recreation. I think that started to change in the 70s and 80s.
And it was a luxury too.
Yeah.
Like, because we got this automobile, now we can go visit Cousin Stu 3 towns away and do it in an afternoon.
But as the culture changed, as people moved further away from where they worked, as suburbs grew up from outside of cities, all that kind of stuff, and as more and more people got cars, driving became less and less enjoyable and more stress. And so now you're in a constant state of heightened alertness as you're driving. If you drive even around Modesto, and people who've lived here a long time have told me this, the traffic here has changed significantly over the course of decades. And as the population has grown, as the amount of traffic on the streets that were not designed for that has increased, and that's every town. That's not just Modesto. That's Fresno. That's Sacramento. That's all over the country. That's what's been happening. And so driving even in your local, not just driving to San Francisco or Sacramento, but just driving around Modesto has become stressful.
From an evolutionary standpoint, you're moving faster than your body knows it should. On some visceral level, we feel threatened, and it puts us in this heightened state of awareness so that when something does pop off on the road, even though you might look at it from a detached perspective and say that's pretty innocuous, it still hits us on this visceral level. And the desire to react angrily is just magnified in a big way because of that heightened state of, what did I call it?
Heightened state of awareness.
Heightened state of awareness. And in thinking about that discussion that I heard on this radio show or podcast, whatever it was, it got me thinking about coronavirus, about the world that we've lived in for the past, I think, 23 weeks now. And even in a situation where you're waiting in line at the pharmacy or going to the grocery store, suddenly we are now also in this heightened state of awareness because with this virus and with its ease of contraction or whatever you want to call it, we are now hyper aware of something dangerous that is around us all the time. And so even a person who's just being rude by brushing past you in a store, now they're going into that 6-foot bubble and they're putting you at danger. And I noticed this about myself for sure. I'm in a heightened state of awareness when I'm walking around a grocery store wearing a mask and Mylar gloves.
Just wearing a mask or wearing gloves outside of your home in a context that you never did before, that puts you into a heightened state of awareness. And just little tasks that used to be so easy now are incredibly difficult. And early on in the pandemic, when you couldn't find supplies that you wanted and all that kind of stuff, it just put us into this crisis mode early on. And then we've never left that crisis mode. That heightened state of awareness has continued for much longer than any one of us would have planned or anticipated. And it's continuing. There's no sign of it letting up. So this heightened state of awareness, I think, has created a whole every single person now is struggling with this reality, and it's given us a lower spark point than before, let's say.
Yeah.
So around the house, with your loved ones, with your family, friends, neighbors, those who you are interacting with, you have a much lower threshold, much lower patience levels, much lower endurance levels. I've talked to so many parents who are struggling because they're trying to work from home, homeschool children, distance learning for children, dealing with many situations they haven't had to worry about before, trying to get kids to wear masks, when they're going to the store, even that level of struggle. And it's created this real sensitivity where no one has any margin left. We're in this constant state of awareness.
I'm so glad you brought up the homeschooling and working from home situation, because that's got to be, for people, I'm so grateful that my wife is able to stay home and take care of my kid. I can't imagine trying to get a significant amount of work done while also, and for these parents that are having their kids still do distance learning, they don't have the luxury really of being able to do regular homeschooling the way we're doing it. That's got to be a heightened state of awareness all the time. The stress, all the stress of your job with none of the resources that you would normally have at your fingertips in a normal working office environment, while also being so much more responsible for your kids' education than before. That's rough, man.
Yeah.
And people have been living, while we were out for the summer, people were already in this heightened state of awareness, and now to have to do work from home and
on top of
distance learning and
oh, by the way, add let's say wildfires and terrible air quality to the mix. The news, the politics, the national state.
Yeah, we were sending our kid out into the backyard to burn off some steam so that he could get some exercise. We can't do that right now.
You're right. So add to
even
that,
having that,
these other factors. It's just so thankfully the Bible does help us with this, believe it or not. It's the idea of small choices every day, and the idea that Jesus wants us to focus on. It sounds familiar, Brian. It does sound familiar. I yap about it way too much, but I think it's essential to focus on the small choices, not the big ones, because sometimes that's too overwhelming. Just focus on the small choices every day. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount gets into that because he was teaching to a culture that was fixated on the big things, on the external obedience to the law, on the don't murder people, don't commit adultery, sort of the big things. And those are important. Yes, the Ten Commandments speak to that, of course. But what Jesus is teaching in the Sermon on the Mount is there's a battle line before that. There's a point of sort of focusing on the internal before you focus on the external. In other words, small choices every day. So he, instead of saying, he actually says, you've heard it said, don't commit murder. But I say, don't get angry in your heart, because that essentially is the first step of committing murder. And what he's saying is internal obedience, focusing on the small choices every day, is the fight you need to fight, because that's the only one you have control over ultimately is your own mind, your own emotions, your own internal reality. So focus on that first by the power of the Holy Spirit. That's important, obviously, because this is hard to do on your own. So with God's help, with the Holy Spirit's help, focus on the internal obedience first.
Brian, you spoke last week about how you had kind of trained yourself to be forgiving. So when that big forgiveness moment came, no, that was 2 weeks ago. Holy cow. So when that big forgiveness moment came, you were far more prepared for it than the average bear. And I wrote down this expression weeks and weeks ago. I wrote down change your factory settings. Mm-hmm. And I think about that, about this sort of reorientation of our innate, inherent, visceral response, and how hopefully that could be done through small choices every day. Because I react angrily very, very quickly when I'm behind the wheel, or just when I'm stressed in general. Brian, what's your expression for me about the way I behave when Christmas Eve is coming up and I'm trying to organize rehearsals and set up the stage?
Stress beast.
Stress beast. That's the one. And it's so accurate for me. And I just think about this thing of what if I can make those small choices every day and recondition my visceral response. And I keep coming back to this verse that Brian is warning me about not misusing in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. And I think about that humility as being such an important key factor. And whether I'm behind the wheel or in a supermarket, if I can have that humility kind of be the core of my being through training, then maybe these little interactions I have with people, I can be far more of a witness than I would be otherwise if I'm doing things the way I normally would.
Right. And that security, that humility has to start with security in who you are in Jesus Christ. And that's really the first, the first awareness is this is not possible in your own strength, and it's not possible sort of without understanding that security. Because if you think about humility, the perfect model that Philippians 2 gives us is Jesus, who knew who he was and knew whose he was, and from that position of security chose to humble himself. And that's what you're essentially wanting to retrain your brain to do, is humble yourself and think of others' needs and wants ahead of your own. And that's what can only happen if you start with that security, though, because if you try to do it from insecurity, that ends up being sort of a humiliation, and that's a totally different concept. Being humble means you know who you are, and that gives you the strength. God has accepted and loved you and treasured you and has a great future for you. So you don't have to put yourself forward. You don't have to assert yourself and demand your rights and demand your way. You can give up your rights, and you could follow the example of Jesus and essentially lay down those rights, even though you have them. Choose not to exercise them, choose not to use them. And you begin to do that in small ways, and you begin to retrain your brain. So yes, you're going to have the flash of emotion. You're going to have the flash of anger or me first or selfishness or whatever those emotional flashes are. They're going to happen still, but you learn to retrain your brain, first of all, so you don't act out of those or speak out of those. And then you gradually train yourself not to, maybe not even to have those.
And I want to be clear, I don't expect this to be accomplished in the space of an afternoon. Like, I assume this is going to take some time. And, visceral reactions are called visceral reactions for a reason, because we're not entirely in control of them. But I think the first step is to begin to question them. Like, when you have that moment of an angry response or whatever it may be, to really try and take a moment right there to evaluate. And that's something that I've been doing unsuccessfully or years. Brian, what's that expression of take your thoughts captive?
Yeah, so we're told in the scriptures to take every thought captive. And the idea for that is your thoughts and emotions sometimes just pop into your head, but you don't have to invite them in to make them a cup of coffee and invite them to stay a while. You take them captive, and if they're not going to bring you closer to Christ or to who Christ wants you to be, you throw them out. You throw them in dungeons, you throw them out, whatever, but you take those thoughts captive, those emotions captive, and that's a learned response. It's not natural to us.
And my Ben version of taking thoughts captive, I'll be out driving somewhere, somebody cuts me off, and something pops out of my lips. And it's not something I shout. I don't honk my horn. I'm not a horn honker. That's one thing I am proud of. But I'll say something rude to that other person, and then I'll say, wait a second, where does that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Ben, isn't that the exact same kind of thing you've done a few times because you weren't paying attention, and can't you extend this person that grace? And isn't this person also somebody that Jesus died for, somebody that Jesus desires the reclamation of? And did your visceral response in that moment do anything to help that person get closer to a redemptive relationship with Christ? And I try to really, it's a weird thing for me to say that, but that's where I try to make my brain go to, because isn't that what we're here on this earth to do?
Yeah.
And
and to understand you're a new creation now, the old is gone, the new has come. So live like that, and that take every thought captive. In your anger, do not sin, Ephesians 4 tells us. So in that anger, do not give in to the sin. In fact, try to change that anger into a positive by reframing it and, extending grace and all that kind of good stuff. But again, it takes a while to train your brain to do this. And if you have a lot of baggage in the past, you got to work through that first. But you got to surrender it all and understand this is a process, but it needs to be the process we're all on together, because that's really where we want to go. The pandemic has highlighted this as a constant state of awareness that's difficult for us, but we don't have to give in to that. That's not an excuse. I find myself so often blaming the pandemic for sin problems I've had for years. And it's like, you know what? Just because I'm in this pandemic doesn't give me an excuse to let up on my sin. My process of holiness here, we're submitting my life fully to Christ. So it doesn't give me an excuse.
And even though we are all living in this same pandemic together, Brian and I, as we sit here, we don't know what your individual challenges are. We don't know what your individual temptations are and how difficult this situation specifically is for you. But please know that, holy cow, your church is praying for you right now.
Yeah.
Brian and I are praying for you guys through all of this time. And we don't understand specifically what your challenges are, but we are with you in this. And we're certainly not claiming that we've achieved this status of righteousness. This is a struggle we're going through together and a journey we're on together.
But it's a struggle we want to talk about, because if we can accomplish some spiritual growth through this difficult pandemic, if we can be closer together as a church family, if we can be closer to Christ through this difficult time, then this all has value. And it's not just this horrible time that we all went through and, it wasn't that awful in 2020. I give it 1 star. I don't recommend 2020. That's just let's turn this around. Let's make something positive out of something horrific.
I'm never coming back to this year again.
I'm never coming back this year again. Wait till I get on Yelp and review it. But let's just not get stuck in the whining and the grumbling and complaining. As much as we have justification to do that, it's not what God wants us to be. So let's figure out ways to submit this fully to the Lord's sovereignty, and let's figure out ways for He can again, Romans 8:28, all of this. He can turn all of these things. Somehow He'll work them for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. If we want Him to do so, He will do that in our lives. So take this opportunity to evaluate yourself spiritually, look at your own hearts and minds, and figure out where you can do some work on this and retrain your brain. And I promise it'll have great benefits later if you work on it now. It's the idea of small choices every day. And if you can focus on just beginning that now when you have the opportunity to, and take this as an opportunity to trust the Lord's grace and work this out every day.
And if you want specific prayer, comfort, or support for your specific challenges, our email inbox is open. We'd love to hear from you. Or about whether you're succeeding in this area of reconditioning your factory response. We'd love to hear that too.
I love success stories. I love testimonies. So yes, definitely. If you've had some past struggles with reconditioning your factory settings, please share that. That would be encouraging for us. So
a little bit of a teaser. This has been a very, very narrow look at Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. But for next week's discussion, we're going to take it a step farther and go in a different direction that Brian feels very, very called to do. So look forward to that. Philippians 2 next week.
I do want to mention something about myself here, because one thing I struggled with was blame shifting, the idea of when something bad happens, somebody has to be at fault. That's from my background, from my family of origin. And so that's something I worked on years ago, where I didn't want to blame someone else. And so my first response from blaming someone else to not doing that anymore. The problem was I then shifted it to blaming myself. So when I broke a glass or when I broke something, I didn't blame whoever left that glass, in a place I wasn't aware it was there, or I didn't try to blame someone else, but I blamed myself. And so then I had a new problem to address. And so I had to retrain my brain again. Stop blaming yourself. It's not that big of a deal. You need to just let it go. It just happens sometimes. So I've actually regressed in this during the pandemic. And so that's one of the things I need to work on myself, is that I'm back to blaming myself. And that's not necessary. We don't need to assign blame in such situations. So that's just a practical example of retraining the brain, and how you may have to do it, a number of times over the years. But it's a worthwhile pursuit. And it can help us be closer to Christ and stronger in our faith, and honestly live more free and live more joyful lives. So that's just a little blurb for you there.
One last word before we go.
Closing reminders. Email us, centenary1911@gmail.com.
Closing reminders, get in your Bible, get in prayer, and talk to each other, and join a Vine group, because it's really important to be connected during this difficult time of isolation. And so fight it, and join a group.
Closing reminders, I put up a new Ralston reflection yesterday, so go to centenarychurch.net and read Brian's blog.
Yay.
Closing reminders, we love you. Bye.
Bye.
With your